welcome to another episode of Cosmic Goblins, a fiction podcast exploring tales of cosmic horror, dark fantasy, sword and sorcery, sci-fi, weird fiction, and more. I'm Alex Wolfgang. For the last few weeks, we've delved into weird horror, but today, we're moving back into the realm of fantasy, with something a little more traditional and a lot more action-packed. Rick Hoskin's Tournament in Frow begins with a classic setup: a mercenary hired by a king to compete against a rival kingdom. But there's a far more sinister game at play than our heroes realize. Tournament in Frow comes from issue 0 of Goblins and Galaxies, first published this past summer. Fantasy fans hang tight, because issue 1 will be coming soon. In the meantime, let's delve into the world of Frow. Cosmic Goblins presents Tournament in Frow by Rick Hoskin, an Onyx and Ray adventure. They ran. Like animals escaping a cruel master, they ran without ever looking back, until they reached the walls of the city of Frow, crouched in the shadows of the mountains, there on the unforgiving plains. The tournament is due, Belaine, the king of Frow, said, addressing them both. He was old, with skin that had wrinkled like a prune, white wisps of stubble on his chin, and his once proud robes of office tattered and moth-eaten. Like his clothes, the room's decor was faded, a testament to the failing state of the city itself. The king sat uncomfortably on his throne, the curvature of his spine forcing him to lean sideways as he spoke to these two newcomers to his city. Tall and slender, the woman had an ethereal beauty, with skin as pale as moonlight and hair as dark as midnight, her clothes as black as her hair. Only when her hair was pushed back from her ears was it evident what she really was: an elf, slumming among humans. Her name was Onyx, and she had left her coven for this life, this awful, tawdry life. Her ally was an elf also, chalk pale like her, with broad shoulders and the lolloping gait of a wolf. He stood with his head jutting forward, eyes narrowed and alert to take in every fraction of their surroundings, with the wariness of one who expects an ambush. His name was Ray, and his body showed the scars of what he was. Every 5 years the tournament comes around, the king explained, and every 5 years we are humiliated and must give up our prized possession. What constitutes the tournament? Onyx asked. A foot race, horse husbandry, and a display of warfare techniques, the king said. My advisors suspect you have the skills to help us not to lose. It was interesting, Onyx thought, the way the man phrased that. He could not imagine winning anymore, so beaten down had he become. He could only think of a victory in terms of no longer losing. Why do your advisors believe this? Onyx asked. Because you are a witch, the king said directly. He glanced momentarily at Ray before averting his gaze, but the query was clear. Onyx nodded. He's my waking eyes when I sleep, she said vaguely. Tell me, Your Highness, what is the prize for which you compete? King Belaine rose stiffly, the aches of his years evident in every movement. He adopted a cane to walk, leaning heavily against it, and, with a word, encouraged his guests to walk with him to the door, which led out into a covered walkway surrounding the castle courtyard. Outside, the afternoon sun was warm, and there were children at play in the grass, their laughter high and constant, like a rushing waterfall. King Belaine paused beneath the shadow of the walkway, watching the children. Onyx stopped beside him, her keen elven eyes discerning details he could not. There, 4 girls and a boy played, each with red hair, crossing a 10-year span from 15 years to 5. Last time it was my youngest daughter, the king said sorrowfully. The time before that, her older sister. And the time before then, my eldest daughter. All of them were taken, to live in Rodenheart, never to be seen by me again. To live and... He stopped, not wanting to say the words. Onyx waited, and when he did not speak again, she asked, And this time? The king called out the name Bella, and the oldest girl looked up at his beckoning. She was pretty, with the beginnings of a woman's figure, flowing red locks worn in a long swinging trail down her back as she hurried through the grass to meet them. She halted at the king's side, her wary eyes on Onyx and Ray. The king touched the girl's hair gently, and Onyx noticed the way she stood, regal and aloof. My granddaughter is of an age now, 15 and blooded. They will take her if... And he could not finish. The girl remained stock still, cold to her grandfather, perhaps knowing that they discussed her fate, or fearful, maybe, of these curious-looking strangers who seemed here to assess her. The king's hand remained on the girl's head, and he closed his eyes as if afraid. "Go back now, Bella. Go play with your cousins," he instructed. The girl ran back to her game, leaving the two elves alone with the king. Onyx looked to Ray as the king closed his eyes, trying to hold back tears. "A foot race, you say? And fighting? And horsemanship?" Yes, the king muttered. "We can help in these things," Onyx assured him. The king perked up, wiping away imaginary tears from his eyes before he spoke. "And the fee?" Onyx shook her head, sensing the monarch's trepidation. "Lodgings for the week, food, and also free passage in and out of the city, as I may need to collect some ingredients for my craft, ones which grow outside these walls," she said. The king brightened, surprised. "That's all?" he said, with the air of a man getting a prize stallion for the price of a lame mule. Onyx bowed her head respectfully, and Ray silently mimicked the gesture. "That's all," she said. The king nodded, ushering the two of them back inside. "I shall give you my seal, which assures you free passage through the gate, day or night." Free passage. Onyx smiled tightly. When they had arrived here, they had walked through the gates with no one so much as questioning them. The king put too much stock in his men, and was too distracted to care. Onyx sat in the lodging room the king's advisors had paid for, above the busy cheer of an inn, running through the items she carried in her purse by the light from the room's small, leaded window. Large as an infant, the purse hung from a strap over her shoulder, and was made of tooled leather, with a multitude of compartments and pockets inside. These compartments contained the ingredients of her craft, herbs and leaves, pieces of dried skin, and the bones of sacrificed animals. Onyx was a witch, as the king had rightly assumed, but her skills were limited, her training incomplete. A rowan root in her hand, sprawling like a child's hair, she looked up to where Ray resided, sitting on the bed with his back to her, eyes fixed on the door. He was the reason she had not completed her apprenticeship. Something in his bruised soul had spoken to her, more fluently than his actual speech, and so she had left the coven with him, absconding by dawn's light, even as her fellow sisters took to bed after a night's magic work. Ray the Wolf, so named for his hunting skills, had been raised to be a loner, but here he was, with her. Onyx turned back to the ingredients she had pulled from the purse. Her supplies were low, but Ray could run and fight, and he could handle a horse. She wouldn't need much. Just a glamour, to make it less obvious that he was not human like the other participants. That night, Ray slept at the foot of Onyx's bed, one eye open, always on guard, even in his sleep. It was unnecessary. She had cast wards about the room to ensure they could not be disturbed by anyone other than another magic wielder. Perhaps he feared magic wielders, she realized. He had reason to. They had not treated him well. She slept, the moonlight painting her slender body silver where it reached hungrily through the curtainless window. In time, the day of the tournament arrived. In the morning, with the moon still a curl in the blue sky, Onyx cast the glamour on Ray's body, rubbing her hands together as she quietly recited the incantation under her breath. Ray stood before her, still as a tree trunk in a storm, his shirt off so that she could be sure the spell had taken effect. His body was a mass of scars, his back ridged with them where he had been taught the lessons as a child, to shape him to become what he was destined to be. Each scar told a story, a whip's lash, the strike of a hot poker, the jab of a blade. He stood unmoving, alabaster skin turning flesh-toned as the glamour took effect, his hair lightening from the color of a crow's feather to the brown of a hawk's. Onyx rotated her hands in the arcane pattern, and Ray's pointed ears seemed to round, completing the deception, transforming him into a human. "It's done," she said. Ray nodded, saying nothing. He slipped his shirt over his body and began to lace up his boots. A cold sun hung in the sky as the people from Rodenheart arrived under their banner. Their flag showed a rat, its tail a golden thread looped around the flapping material's squared edges. King Belain sat in the royal box over the courtyard arena. His wife, 2 sons, granddaughters, and grandson nestled around him, along with several of his most trusted advisors. Onyx had been invited to the royal box also, and she sat to one side of the royal party, wringing her hands against the chill air. Belain pointed to a coach behind the rider, who swung the Rodenheart's banner over his head. The coach was painted pure white, and its windows had no glass, just struts like the bars of a cell, but ornately crafted into a crest. "There he is, do you see?" he said. In the coach, hiding from the blazing sun, sat a man roughly Belain's own age, dressed in a showy armored breastplate, a regal staff as long as a man's forearm held in his hand, and beside him, an old woman wearing a crown of gold. Several of the girls booed or made faces, while Bella, the oldest child, just watched, stoic-faced as if wearing a mask. Onyx leaned across to the advisor closest to her, and asked in a quiet voice, "Who is that?" "Shalban, the king of Rodenheart," the advisor, a man in his 40s with hair that was both wild and balding, replied. "He looks old," Onyx said. Enthralled, the advisor continued to watch the ceremony, ignoring her comment. 20 men arrived from Rodenheart. This number included the king, the queen, and their guards, leaving 12 to compete in the tournament itself. Belain of Frow fielded the same number of men, 11 humans and 1 elf, hidden beneath the veil of the glamour. King Shalban's party sat in a specially constructed box beside Belain, where the crowds of Frow and Rodenheart massed around the arena's edge, keen to see the games play out. The event referred to as warfare technique was really an excuse for violence. Men fought tooth and claw, using weapons carved from those very things, drawing blood with each blow to the thrill of the entertainment-starved crowd. Starved of more than just entertainment, Onyx thought, looking over the malnourished audience. She and Ray had come to Frow hungry, and they had begged in the streets until they had been identified by the authorities. Onyx could dance in ways beguiling to men, though it cheapened her to do so. There was no merit to bringing pleasure. It betrayed things she believed in, and the goddess she worshipped. But the people of Frow had so little food, and what they gave had been of low quality, stale bread that had never tasted fresh, drinks whose fermentation was tainted, turning their taste sharp and bitter, a searing taste felt behind the eyes. The king's men had recognized an elf woman, and had guessed from her possessions that she was a practitioner of the craft. And, so believing, she and Ray had been recruited for this task, enlisted to win the tournament that had never been won. To see Ray fight was to see a perfect ballad brought to life. Each move was timed to perfection, rhyming with the next, again and again. The wolf found himself between 4 men, armed with a dagger no longer than his hand, fingertip to wrist. His foes were armed with long scimitars and a spear, each with more reach than his own paltry weapon. Knowing he was outnumbered and outclassed in weapons, the men of Rodenheart taunted him, trying to get a rise from Ray before they gave him a beating. "What are you going to do, Frow man?" one called, whistling loud notes as if calling a dog. "He's going to sleep here in the dirt," said another, this one armed with a spear as long as he was tall. Ray's expression remained unchanged. He looked at the men as they spread out to encircle him, his eyes darting left and right to keep track of them all. The spear jabbed close, and he sidestepped, grabbed it, and pulled its owner near. In that same moment, Ray's other hand flicked out, throwing the dagger he held. The dagger cut the air until it struck the whistling man high in the chest, just above the breastplate of the armor he wore. The man went down, coughing blood as he sunk to his knees. A moment of chaos followed, barked orders conjoined with confusion. "What's he doing? What are you doing? Stop him! He's one man! Derek's down, Forget him, get the Frow man!" Ray was no Frow man, of course, only the glamour made him appear so. He moved with the speed and grace of an elf, feeling nature as much as his own body as he leapt with the wind, high into the air before bearing down on the man with the scimitar. It looked like he was running in the air, the movement so swift and so graceful. And then, bang! Ray's outstretched foot met the man's chest, and he sailed with him as his opponent crashed backwards with a howl of pain, riding his flailing form like he was a circus entertainer standing atop a galloping horse. The man slammed against the ground, the air blurting out of his lungs like a popped balloon. Ray was down on one knee in a moment, plucking the scimitar from his opponent's loosened grip, and he brought it up and around to meet another blade as his remaining opponent charged him. "Son of a whore!" his bearded opponent raged. "I'll hack you to bloody pieces!" Blade met blade with a clang of metal, and Ray's opponent cried out as he felt how immovable Ray's scimitar was, like striking a rock wall. The Rodenhart man slashed left, right, left again, trying to get past it, to make Ray falter or fall, but the wolf held strong, still down on one knee, defending the attack from above. The crowd had fallen to near total silence now, awed as they were by this display of fighting prowess. Ray's opponent was becoming more desperate, slashing more wildly, but he found each blow met with the wolf's blade as it blurred to find his. The second man was rising again, the one with the spear whom Ray had wrong-footed. He charged at the fighters, spear down to skewer Ray from behind. The elf saw the shadows move, sensed the disruption in the air currents, and he leapt out of the way just as the spearman reached him. With a cry of pain and another of horror, the spear went through Ray's bearded opponent, who stood there in disbelief as the sharp point pierced his armor and he felt it scraping against his insides like a loose tooth. He dropped his scimitar, looking somehow offended that his own ally could have done this, before keeling sideways, the spear planted in his chest like a flagpole. Ray looked at the remaining man, weaponless now, surrounded by the bodies of his colleagues. The spearman saw the calm in Ray's expression, saw the focus in his eyes. As the crowd alternatively whooped and jeered, depending on which city they represented, the Rodenhart man reached for the protruding spear's end and tried in vain to pull it free from his ally's chest as Ray paced towards him. High above, in the royal box, King Belain raised his hand in the gesture to cease, and a few seats away, Onyx rubbed her hands together, weaving the glamour anew. "It seems we've won the display," the king announced. "However, that is but a spoke in the tournament wheel." He sounded resigned, knowing this display did not matter to the outcome. Only the race mattered. The display of horsemanship was impressive. People from Frow and from Rodenhart competed in a series of tricks and challenges. Ray could handle a horse, but he was respectful, unlike many of the competitors. He was a stranger to his steed, and it was all he could do to urge speed from the beast, and keep the horse steady as it was made to dance on the spot and to jump hurdles on command. In the royal box, Onyx watched closely, enjoying seeing the way the wolf handled the animal. This was for display only. It mattered not to the final outcome of the tournament, and yet it served to entertain the crowd. As she watched, her hands weaved once more in the pattern of the glamour, ensuring what needed to be seen was seen, and what was not was hidden. Finally, The sun nudging lower in the sky, there came the foot race, an endurance task that saw all of the remaining men run the circuit of the arena multiple times until they began to drop, one by one. By the end of the 9th lap, there were just 5 runners left in the race. Ray and another man representing the city of Frow, and 3 of the men from Rodenhart, each of whom exhibited incredible stamina. Onyx watched closely, wondering at when the humans would fall, or indeed, if they would. There was no magic here, not that she could detect. Frow was poor, and its people were underfed. When they fell, it was from genuine exhaustion, while the men of Rodenhart had reserves they could call upon in each lap of the race. Down below, Ray and the Frow man kept pace with their visitors, passing once more the same spots where their compatriots had fallen in previous laps. The crowd seemed to hold its collective breath, sensing something was about to happen. Ray could run and run, his breathing steady, putting one foot in front of the other like a mechanism. His mind was in the race and also on his own body, looking inwards as he had been taught, feeling each muscle and each nerve as his body worked. He was so invested in himself, he might almost have missed what happened then. 2 of the men from Rodenhart, young, strapping figures who could have been twins, dropped a little way back, subtly, until they were level with Ray and the other representative of Frow. Another step, another step, another step. The men from Rodenhart moved closer, narrowing the space between them as they came to either side of Ray and his ally, as if to box in their opponents while their teammate kept up his firm lead. Ray watched the man up ahead, long hair past his collar, veins like a tattoo down the back of his legs. A horn sounded as the lead man passed the royal boxes, indication of the final lap of the race. Another step, another step, another step. Without warning, the lead man stumbled, seemingly tripping on nothing. He fell to the ground at speed, bringing his knees up and his arms over his head to protect himself so he would not be trampled as the other runners drew close. It was chaos for a few minutes. The 2 Rodenhart runners to either side had closed in unnoticed, forcing the 2 representatives from Frow to line up behind the man who fell, with no way to avoid him. Leading, Ray's teammate tripped, his foot catching the fallen man, and a hand whipped out there at ground level to reach for Ray's leg also, the move hidden from the audience by a cluster of runners. Ray stamped down hard, springing away from the sly ambush until he was through it. But, as he veered left, one of the twins barged him back with his shoulder, straight into the other man. Ray felt himself dance in place, batted between the 2 men as they closed in, a pincer movement intended to force him to either slow down or trip. He leaned down, hoping to barge through, but the one to his right intentionally tripped over his own feet, careening into the disguised elf and dropping them both, to the roar of the crowd. Ray's knee scraped the ground, and, still moving, he propelled himself forward and up, hissing out a strained breath. The other twin had taken the lead. Ray was 2 horse lengths behind him. Another step, closer. Another step, closer. The banner unfurled ahead of them to mark the end of the race, and it was just too late. 10 more steps, and Ray would have caught the man, perhaps less than 10. But he didn't. His opponent turned and smiled, sweat pouring down his face. "Good race, my man," he said cheerily, holding his hand out for Ray to shake. Victory stolen by deceit. Ray burned inside, meeting the man's eyes with his cold stare. The man flinched, but he kept smiling until he had freed his hand from the wolf's grip. He was relieved when the wolf turned and strode away, without a word. As the man from Rodenhart swung his city banner below to the cheers of the crowd, things in Frow's royal box were deathly silent. The oldest granddaughter's face had paled, and she was wrapping her brilliant red hair nervously through the fingers of one hand, over and over. "Go," the king instructed her. "Quickly." King Belain looked across to where Onyx was seated, his own face reddening as the blood beneath his skin threatened to boil over. But the elf witch was already gone. In the corridor outside the royal box, a girl of 15 years of age walked to the visitor's suite, head held proudly despite her tears, a Frow guard at her side. As she reached the door, it opened, and there stood the aged King Shalban in his shining armor, flanked by his own guards, each man armed with a short blade and a sword at their hips. Close up, it was clear that his armor was ill-fitting, much too large for the withered old man who wore it. Shalban smiled, and it was an ugly thing, tongue discolored, teeth yellowed and broken behind the dry, cracked lips. "My prize," he said. "Yes," said the girl quietly. "My name is Bella." The king hushed her with a gesture. "My prize," he said again, reveling in the word as if he could taste it with that ugly, discolored tongue. As night fell, Bella was ushered into King Shalban's coach, facing him and his aged wife on the journey back to Rodenheart. The queen looked to be at least 100, just a skeleton with skin draped artlessly upon it, head slumping forward with the weight of her crown, or perhaps just from the weight of her years. The king eyed Bella the whole trip, tongue playing repeatedly over his dry lips, making the brief journey feel like a lifetime. Rodenheart, like Frow, was a walled city dominated by a castle, whose sprawling web-like walls embraced the totality of the residences and the activities within. The castle was made of dark stone, and it struck a presence over the city, its towers like victorious fists punching the sky, or perhaps reaching contemptuously for the gods above. The girl was shown to a dressing room, where ladies-in-waiting had drawn her a bath scented with rose petals, as they prepared her for the night. "You're a pretty girl," said one handmaiden, a woman whose girth was testament to the wealth of Rodenheart, in stark contrast to the poverty of Frow. "The king will like you." "Do you think so?" red-haired Bella asked, timidly. "Just treat him nice," said the handmaiden, "and it will all be over very quickly. He's old now, and they say he often falls asleep without even—" The woman stopped herself from saying more, placing her hand over her mouth as if to block the words from falling out. The women around her laughed at her unfinished observation. So it was what she had expected, the girl realized. She was to share a bed with the aged king. And after? What then? For now, that was unguessable. The king waited in his bedchamber, a huge room that could have seated 50 people and still had room to house a ball. Dressed in a wisp of material and smelling of rose water, Bella entered after knocking just once, assured she was expected. The guards outside had eyed her body through what little covering the dress offered, openly commenting on it as she approached the door, lewd in their desires and their expectations once the king was asleep. She ignored them, entering the bedchamber confidently. The granddaughter of a king should be confident. It was to be expected. The old king lay unclothed atop the bed, its covers rolled back. Even from here, he stank of the vicious perfume he had daubed his body in to cover the smells of age, and of where his body had sores that had become infected. "Come, my prize," he beckoned. "Let me see you in the light." The girl strode forward, confidence wavering a little as she crossed the cavernous room to be assessed in the inconstant glow of the candles. The king smiled as she trembled, enjoying her discomfort. Her eyes fell upon his rising satisfaction. It was hard to miss even in the flickering light. "Sit with me," the king said, licking his dry lips hungrily. "You're my prize. Sit with me." The girl stepped forward, the wisps of her garment like gossamer, a veil separating the king from his knight's desire. "Closer. Let me touch you," the king said. She sat then, beside the king atop the bed, but keeping her distance still. Was she afraid, or merely repelled? It was hard to say. King Shalban reached for her, running his hand up her back and then down, pressing against the material until he cupped her pert backside. "Nice," he said. "So young." Bella dipped her head respectfully. "My king, please," she said in a quiet voice. "Do not do this. Let me go. I am only a child." King Shalban laughed, a cruel, confident sound that echoed through the vast room. "A child? No," he finished. "My brother has pierced you before me, ensuring your entry into womanhood. Do not try to deny it. I see his paws on you even now." Bella reared back, trying to understand what the man meant. "Your brother?" she asked, timidly. Shalban nodded, smiling. "Belain," he said. "Was there ever a woman he could not keep his tool out of? If there was, I have yet to win her. Or do you deny that his mark is there upon you?" As he spoke, the old man pointed to her thigh, where the red mark showed. The girl called Bella looked down at the mark. She had taken it to be a birthmark when she had cast the glamour, reproducing the child's body in every way. But it was not a birthmark, Onyx realized now. It was a brand, a small burn to mark King Belain's territory, like a notch on his bedpost. "Now," said King Shalban, "let us lose your clothes and discover what treasures lay beneath." Moving closer in the flicker of the candles, Onyx pulled at the wisp of material she wore, lifting it up and over her head to the king's mounting satisfaction. He was keen for her now, his urgency at its peak, but she held him back with a gentle hand. "Slowly," she said, brushing her hand playfully down his chest and further. He groaned at her touch, his breathing coming heavier now, panting, and the smell of him was foul to the elf's nostrils. Onyx's caressing hand reached down and twisted, breaking his weapon with an audible snap that was drowned out by his scream. Outside the bedchamber door, the king's guards laughed, assuming he was crying out in ecstasy at the newfound delights the nubile young girl had brought. Stealing a horse from the royal stable, Onyx rode back to Frow that night, dressed in clothes from one of the ladies-in-waiting. The king's agony had been so powerful she could taste it. But the task was not yet complete. She knew now why the girl Bella had been so cold around her grandfather. It had not been fear of being taken to Rodenheart. It had been fear of him, and of what he had already done, and might do again. Perhaps she had even dared imagine her life in Rodenheart might be better, though it would not have been so. The rain was pouring when she reached the city gates, lightning at play between the dark clouds in the midnight sky. The watchman was shocked when he saw the pale elven face at the gate, and he blanched as if in imitation. His own form of glamour spell, Onyx thought, smiling. She showed the king's seal, which she still carried with her, assuring free entry to the city, day or night. Within the city walls, everything was quiet. The castle was asleep, only the night watch still alert, and they easily persuaded by the same seal which Onyx had shown at the gate. She strode to the king's quarters and called him, magically augmenting her voice just a little. Hearing the noise penetrate through his dreams, King Belain awoke and felt drawn to investigate. He found Onyx waiting in his throne room, dressed in the clothes of the handmaiden, still wet from the rain. "You," he said, jabbing a spindle-thin finger at her in accusation. "You promised to save my granddaughter, and then you failed. You and your man, and when I looked you had disappeared." "I had disappeared," she agreed, nodding. "Then what brings you back?" the king demanded. "More pay, is it?" "No," Onyx said. "At least, not in coin." The king stumbled uncertainly. The room was dark, and he felt suddenly suspicious of this elven woman standing before him. "What do you mean?" he asked warily. Onyx met his gaze, her face of high cheekbones and blade-sharp planes now a stern warning. "You had the prize before King Shalban," she said. "What?" Belain exploded. "You had taken the prize before your brother, whether the girl wanted it or not," Onyx said, and I can tell you, she did not. The king made a dismissive gesture, waving her aside as he turned, intending to find his guards. You are a mad witch, woman. You have no concept of what a king merits. Oh, but I do, Onyx told him in a low voice, her hands weaving a glamorous spell anew. This time the spell was not on her, nor on Ray, who had absconded with the girl the evening before, nor the rented room where they hid. This time it was set on King Belain, making him see himself 1,000 times, every line of sin etched across his withered body and age-lined face. And he screamed, as old delight revisited became horror, falling to his knees with no more awareness than a sleepwalker leaving his bed. Onyx drank of the king's pain while reciting the sacred words to the goddess, which was payment enough, beyond what she could have anticipated when she had taken this task. The king would be found in the morning, trembling in a pool of his own piss and drool, unable to cast aside the things that he had seen and that haunted him. But as night remained and the streets were dark, Onyx went back to the inn and found Ray and the girl in their room, protected by her magic wards. Bella was asleep in the bed, and Ray the wolf, as ever, lay on the floor at its foot, one eye open, wary of intruders. Ray had been waiting for Bella when Belain had ordered her to go to his brother, stood poised outside the royal box while Onyx took her place. He had not explained anything with words, had only met her gaze with his and calmed her the way he had calmed the horse earlier that same day. It had been enough to ensure trust. Onyx stood at the open door to the room now, pushing it gently wider. It's me, she whispered, sensing Ray stiffen in readiness for attack. He eased up to greet her, muscles still tense in case it was yet some trick. Is she harmed? Onyx asked. Ray shook his head, no. Let her sleep, Onyx said. Her monsters have been slain, or incapacitated enough that they will never harm her again. We should leave. She saw the query on Ray's face, his brows furrowed. The city will likely be in need of a new monarch soon, Onyx explained, and there may be some trouble before that happens, the kind that sees strangers persecuted. Best we not be counted among them. Ray nodded and gathered Onyx's clothes for her, leading the way to the stables to steal 2 horses and put some distance between themselves and the walled city. And outside, the night's thunder giggled its last, and dawn's light began to paint the sky anew. Rick Hoskin is a multi-award-winning New York Times best-selling writer of novels, graphic novels, video games, and animation. He's written comics for Star Wars, Superman, and various other properties, and won the Dragon Award for Best Graphic Novel. He writes sci-fi and horror novels and short stories under his own name and as James Axler. Thanks again for joining us on Cosmic Goblins for Episode 5. If you're enjoying the podcast, we would be so grateful if you took a moment to leave a rating or a review wherever you get your podcasts. That's it for this episode. See you in 2 weeks for Episode 6.